you're learning about the therapies within that therapeutic area, how they work, the mechanism of action, the pathogenesis of disease. So that's very interesting. And from that perspective, I feel very close to the science.
Hey everyone, welcome to SwitchHubTV. It's your host, Wei and John. Today on the show, we have Jarem Edwards. Jarem started out as a research assistant in melanoma research before taking on the role of clinical trials coordinator. More recently, he's transitioned into a medical science liaison role within the dermatology industry. Jarem, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here and going well.
Yeah, thanks for taking time to be on the show. We're going to start in classic SwitchHub fashion. How and why did you get into science? If you could give us a bit of background there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's something that I've always loved. During high school, I enjoyed science, particularly physics, got into university and started out actually in law because my dad was saying, oh, there's no future in science. But then quickly switched back to science because I didn't like law. At least then I didn't. And yeah, I've enjoyed it ever since. And the reason is it's not only very interesting and it satisfies my curiosity, but it also, I guess, is an opportunity, I think, to use that knowledge to help people. And that's something that, I've always been interested in doing, having a job where I feel like I'm actually helping and contributing to society. So yeah, that's for me the reason for why I like science.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because the first science that you mentioned was physics, but as I know, and we'll get into a bit later, you didn't end up doing physics. So I assume in your first year of science would have been very similar to other science students. You would have done, your biology, chemistry, maybe even some physics, and you would have done maths as well. How did you end up deciding? Because you did end up being quite specialized. How did you end up deciding the path that you went down?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I went into science at university with the intention of actually, pursuing physics. And that was based on, I guess, my classes in high school where I just loved the physics courses, I just lapped up everything to do with physics. And I think it was because the maths wasn't so heavy in the physics courses. I wasn't, bad at maths or anything. I was pretty good. But what I really loved was the concepts, understanding how things work, kind of the thought experiments, that type of thing. And I found at university, it was very heavy maths in physics. And for me, some of that, I guess, concept was more reduced and more maths was coming to the foreplay. So, at the same time, I did a bit of chemistry and biology as part of the generals, and I wasn't going to choose biology because I didn't do that in high school. But my sister encouraged me to do it, and after doing a course in human bio, I was like, wow, how come I've never done this before? I should have been doing this in high school. This is great. And I guess from there, I started taking on more kind of biology units, like molecular bio, biochemistry, and just found my way into immunology, which I just loved so much, and continued to pursue that into my research in honors and as a PhD student.
Yeah. So at the end of your bachelor degree, right, which would have been 3 years, give or take, you sort of had a choice whether you would go straight into industry or if you would stay back at uni to do your honors and PhD. Was there ever any question for you, or was that like the path that you had your mind set on?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I did question what I should do. I think so. During my undergrad, I was very lucky. I had a friend who encouraged me to try and get involved in as many, I guess, opportunities to do research as possible. And so, I had, I think, 3 opportunities during, my undergrad to actually work with, professors and doctors in their laboratories, which was fantastic. You know, it opened my eyes to what research was, kind of the environment, the academic life, and I loved it. Really interesting, but at the same time, it also gave me the opportunity to see the challenges of pursuing an academic life, and you know, things such as, you know, research funding and having to be flexible. You know, those were some of the challenges, and amongst others. And so, yeah, at the 3-year mark, I was thinking, okay, what do I do? And I think because I had such a love for research, I thought I would at least do honors and try honors out. So I did that. Loved honors. Again, that was at the end of honors, a choice. Do I now go to industry with, you know, having a bit of research experience, or do I pursue a PhD? And this was, yeah, a very difficult decision to make, because you know, I tried to get advice from others, and some people were saying generally, you know, the industry would prefer someone who is, you know, less, I guess, more flexible to mold into what the industry would have them be. And then others saying, no, you know, do a PhD, you'll become more qualified. And, you know, they like, you know, someone who's got that, all that research experience behind them. So there was a bit of conflicting advice that I was getting, and I wasn't sure what to do. But, you know, for me, I always wanted to do a PhD because I was interested in research, and I enjoyed it. But at the same time, I also knew I didn't want to stay in academia. I knew I wanted to go into industry with my PhD. And so the options were, can I get industry to fund my PhD? And if so, great, I'll do that. If I can't, do I go in how I am at the moment, or do I pursue a PhD with other funding? And I was very lucky to be able to have a number of scholarships, which kind of acted like what would you call it, like a salary. And so I decided to pursue my PhD, given that I had, you know, had a salary with it as well. Yeah.
So
but it was a tough decision to make, and I think that's for that reason I took a year off from my PhD and actually became a research assistant, for a number of reasons, to kind of suss out what course to take, but also to be able to get a few publications underway to be able to become more competitive for those scholarships.
Right. So once you got into the industry, what is your perspective now in terms of whether businesses or like the industry wanted a person with a PhD or wanted, you know, as an undergraduate? So what is your opinion on that, or your perspective?
Yeah, I don't think it's. I think it's definitely a valid pathway. For the role that I'm in at the moment as an MSL, a PhD is, you know, extremely good because, you know, with all of that experience in immunology, I can bring that to the table. It also gives me credibility when I'm talking to thought leaders, knowing that I've done a PhD and that I have some research experience. So from that point of view, that I think the companies that would employ someone for an MSL would definitely be looking for someone with a PhD, but that's not the only person they're looking for. You know, in my kind of role, anyone with a bit of clinical experience as well would be very sought after, I think. So clinicians themselves, high-profile nurses, even pharmacists. So even though PhD is a route and a valid route to get there, it's not the only one.
Right. Can you explain a little bit more about being an MSL, and what is it? What does
So I'm
an
fairly
MSL
new
do?
to the role.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, sure. So an MSL stands for Medical Science Liaison. Basically, you're the liaison between clinicians practicing in a particular therapeutic area and the company itself. And the role is really to, I guess, it falls within the medical affairs department in a company. So it's distinct from sales, it's distinct from commercial. It falls under its own department. And really, I guess the objective is to, connect and collaborate with clinicians on shared. And so you might, for example, one common way of collaborating with a clinician would be to provide updated information on the therapeutic areas of interest to that clinician, whether that be clinical data, whether it be scientific or biological data. That's one way, and a very common way. We also, as MSLs, try and understand the clinician's perspectives about how medicines actually work in the real world with their patients. So trying to understand, where would a therapy lie in their treatment algorithm? What kinds of patients would they use this therapy for? Who wouldn't they use it for? And all of that information is, important to the company because it helps the company, I suppose, position the therapy in a way that's most going to help the patients that the clinician serves. So yeah, it's a two-way dialogue between the MSL and the clinician, yeah, hopefully that makes a bit of sense.
Oh, that's interesting.
No, that's thanks for that clarification. And I mean, as you said, you are new to the role, and I think I already know the answer to this question, but I want your sort of, I guess, your explanation of it. I have to assume that the work that you did in your PhD and I guess preliminary years as a researcher really informed and helped. Was a really good foundation for what you're doing now. Is that right? Is it the same line of work? If you could just talk about the relationship between what you did in your PhD and early years and then what you're doing now as an MSL.
Yeah, absolutely. My advice, just generally speaking, to anyone would be to try and keep the goal in mind from the beginning. And so I know it's very difficult in science to know what you want to do, and particularly because it is quite ambiguous, what is in industry, what kind of roles exist in industry. So it's hard, I understand, to know from the beginning what you want to do. But the earlier you do know, the easier it's going to be for you, because you can start putting your experiences in that context. So for example, I knew quite earlier on that I wanted to be in industry. I didn't want to be in academia. The question was, okay, what in industry? And I didn't know much about what kind of roles were in industry, but I did know about the medical science liaison role from friends. But I also knew, of course, that there is just general research that you can do as part of the company. So the company might have its own in-house research facility. I could be a part of that. So I knew at the beginning that I wanted either of those two roles. And so, I tried to gain as much research experience even before I started honours of research, so that I at least have a little bit of experience in that regard. The MSL role is not only requires that scientific and research aspect of things, but also a good knowledge of the clinical world as well. So the clinical aspect of things, which is different, from basic biology science. And for that reason, I chose a lab that that was very translational. In fact, the leaders of the lab were clinicians themselves. And so, I was very fortunate to be able to do research that was very relevant to the patients that they saw. I also heard about, some of what they saw as the challenges clinically. So I had not only the scientific world open up to me through research in the lab, but also the clinical world, which helped me eventually get my clinical trial role and later on as an MSL. So to wrap it all up quickly, the experience I had prior to this MSL role certainly helped, because I think the industry values having that research and scientific mindset, but also that clinical mindset from the beginning. So positioning myself up with that kind of background made me more competitive. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
No, yeah, definitely.
I will say is that one thing I will say is that my research and clinical expertise were all in melanoma, and that was, one of the interest areas for me, melanoma, right? That's why I did my PhD in it. The current role I have is not in melanoma, and so I think this is an example where you can transition to something that you may not be completely comfortable with, but you have enough experience in those other areas where you can give something different a go.
Yeah. And I like how you brought up the fact that you were involved in melanoma research, and that formed the basis of, I guess, your years of your research. What was the highlight? Because you spent quite a few years in doing that. What was the highlight for you in terms of anything that you can discuss which isn't confidential? What was the highlight in terms of your years of melanoma research? What was the coolest thing that you got to work on or contribute to?
Yeah, good question. Well, I guess there are a number of things. The experience in general, I have to say, was just amazing. And so, for example, from the research point of view, it was I was extremely lucky because we had patient samples, tumor samples that we could use for research. So it was very relevant to the patients. We weren't doing this in mice, or we weren't doing this in other animal models. We were doing this with real life patient samples, and that was amazing because all of the data you're generating is immediately applicable to those patients. So that was a huge highlight. I have to say that in my PhD, in terms of research, one of the, I suppose, highlights for me actually came early on, where we had a look at a particular type of immune cell in melanoma cancers. And I think we were one of the first to actually show that they were potentially important in melanoma. And there's some of the immunotherapies that we were using. And even though that was my first paper, it's probably been the most cited paper within my PhD. So that was really cool. Another thing which I really loved during this whole experience as part of my PhD was being able to participate in what we call multidisciplinary team meetings. These are meetings which are typically for clinicians, but as a scientist, we had the opportunity to actually attend these meetings. And in these meetings, this is where you have a number of different clinicians with from different backgrounds. So you might have a radiologist, you'll have an oncologist, you'll have a pathologist, you'll have the surgeons. You have all of these different clinicians with different specialties coming together to talk about cases. And that was extremely, you could see, I guess, the clinical problems. And you would also have the opportunity as a scientist to present your translational findings to the team as well. And I really enjoyed having that close collaboration between science and the clinical world. And because of that, I pursued a PhD in melanoma research, because it was just fascinating to me having that opportunity to collaborate with the clinicians as well.
Yeah. Was there any ever sort of like heated debates, let's put it that way, heated debates between the scientists and the clinicians? Because I can just imagine, those scientists with their data, they don't live in the real world, they're, in vivo versus in vitro, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, I have to say that I think because we had the opportunity to actually, participate in these meetings a lot, our perception of, I guess, what were the important questions to ask, what were the important, data gaps to address, we became more familiar with that. So I don't think there were too many arguments. It was a very synergistic relationship. But I have noticed that there is a bit of a divide sometimes between the clinical and the scientist, if the scientist doesn't understand the clinical realm. And if that happens, then of course there can be a bit of frustration between the two. But I have to say, I never really saw that where I was.
Yeah.
So within your attendance at the multidisciplinary meetings, what was your valuable takeaway from that meeting that applies to your newly Msl role?
I suppose, that's a good question. For me, I think understanding, it's a little bit hard to say because I'm now in dermatology, which is a completely different therapeutic area to, what melanoma was, in those multidisciplinary team meetings. But I guess generally speaking, learning how to communicate with clinicians is an important skill. And sometimes as scientists, we can be caught up in the jargon of things, and sometimes we just need to try and make it more understandable and try and make it more relevant, or help the clinician see how it is relevant to the patients that they serve. So I think that's a valuable skill to have. And more than the MDT meetings, I think I actually developed that skill as a clinical trial coordinator, because in that role, it was kind of you were the liaison, the organizing the schedule for the patient for their clinical trial that they're on. And each time that they were in to see the clinician, you would see the patient first. You would ask a bunch of questions. You would do a bunch of observations on the patient, and then you would go with the patient together into the clinician's office. And before that, you would give a brief update to the clinician about, what you had done with the patient and where the patient is at the moment in their schedule on the clinical trial, anything to be aware of, symptoms, adverse events. And so that skill, being able to communicate all of that information to a clinician, I think was very much developed during that time period, and a great skill to have. Also, being in the room at the same time with the patient and the clinician, you could see how the clinician interpreted information and gave it back to the patient. And so I think it was a great opportunity to see, I guess, the full circle from, the patient to the doctor, the doctor back to the patient. So yeah, it was very interesting for me.
And Jarem, what was it like for you to transition from research to being an MSL? Because you were in research for, I mean, if we include your honors and PhD, you were in research for quite a few years.
Yeah.
What was that like? Did you feel like a fish out of water? Were there times where you sort of questioned, oh, what am I doing? I should go back into research. What was that transition like?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I had done a lot of reading beforehand, to understand the role of the MSL. And in addition to that, I actually took on a course called From Pharma to Science. And I learned about that course through my supervisor. I went onto the course, and that one was, I think, a really good one as well, to help me understand exactly what the MSL role is, what it looks like, what your day would look like, how much travel is involved, what your activities are as an MSL. And so that was a great preparation for me. So by the time I actually got into this current role, yes, it is very different from research, but I'm not too surprised at the things that I'm doing right now. And in fact, I feel as though I've been able to hit the ground running because I had that background knowledge through those courses and also through my own reading. So that was certainly helpful. Getting an MSL role is very competitive, especially if you don't have clinical experience. I think it is far more difficult. If you have just done pure research, basic biology research, I think it can be very difficult because the company wants you to know that you can actually talk to these thought leaders and to be able to learn from them, and also to be able to talk with them in a way that they understand. So it is very difficult. And so that's why I would suggest, if this is something of interest to you, that you would start trying to build your career pathway in a way that you also get some of those experiences that you can't get alone in academia, such as clinical trials or some kind of clinical experience. I was very fortunate that because of my background, and perhaps because of some of the background training that I had from pharmaceutical science and other such things, that it was relatively easy to get this current role, which I'm very grateful for because I enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, no, that's
Right.
that's good to hear. Yeah, go on, John.
Oh, no, I was just asking about if you have any advice to give in terms of trying to get to where you are. What would you like, to tell those who wants to be in your position?
Yeah, I would start planning as soon as you can. Don't leave it to the end of your PhD and then start thinking, oh, maybe I would like to do that. No, it's going to be very difficult for you. It's not impossible, can be done, but it will be very difficult. Much easier to do your PhD and to try and get other experience with that goal in mind. And I think that applies not only for something like the MSL role, but for any role that you're interested in whether it's academia or industry. If you want to pursue academia, publications are key. You need to get as many publications as you can, because that's your currency for getting funding or for a fellowship. And so if academia is what you want to pursue, then really you should be trying to collaborate with a lab that will allow you to get publications and to get merit awards or whatever it is, because all of that kind of thing is important for your future in academia. If you want to move into industry and you want to do research in industry, publications again are very important. Collaborating, demonstrating that you're a team player, that's all important. If it's something like an MSL role, actually publications are not the big thing. That's not really the thing that they look for. It's more your interactions with clinicians, to be able to present your knowledge of the role and your knowledge of the therapeutic area. Those things are more key. And so, yeah, my advice would be to try and understand early on what you want to do, and then start planning accordingly.
We're just about out of time, Jarem, but I just want to ask one more question. What do you miss most about research? Do you miss using a pipette?
Yeah, well, it's only been 3 months now, so it hasn't been too long away from research.
It hasn't been too long.
But I think as an MSL, you are very much close to research still, but in a different way. So you're learning all about the therapy that you're representing. You're learning about the therapies within that therapeutic area, how they work, the mechanism of action, the pathogenesis of disease. So that's very interesting. And from that perspective, I feel very close to the science. One thing that I guess I do miss is the fact that you're not, how would I put it, at the discovery level of science.
You're not there getting your hands dirty.
You're not the one actually doing it and discovering for yourself and asking those questions and being the first to find something. In the current role, it's more that work has been done and these are the results. Based on that, X, Y, and Z. You're not part of that process, which, you know, I do miss because I enjoy being part of that discovery phase of science.
Yeah, no, I love that answer. We're just about out of time, but thanks again for being on the show. Really appreciate it. Yeah,
no problem, of course. And let me know if there's anything I can do to help your audience.
Yep. Cheers.
Thank you.
Have a good one,
Cheers.
Jarem.